Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the London School of Economics. I'm Will Venters. I'm an associate professor here in Information Systems and Digital Innovation in the Department of Management, and it's a huge pleasure to invite Phil here to talk about how to build adaptive organizations in the age of AI. We're really sorry that Jana couldn't make it due to a family emergency, and we're sad that she's not joining us. Both Jana and Phil are executives in residence in Amazon Web Services. They're part of a team of 15 people worldwide who advise Fortune 500 executives on technology adoption, technology adaptation, innovation, and culture change. Now, before I hand over to Phil, just a couple of words of housekeeping. You will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the talk. After the lecture, there will be a drinks reception directly behind you, and everybody here is welcome. The event is being recorded, as you can see, and assuming there's no technical difficulties, there will be a video and podcast available. We live in a time where AI technology has this promise to transform, but few organizations are managing to gain the broad and deep impact of that promise. Here at the LSE last week, we heard from Microsoft's key AI innovator who was talking about the acceleration problem, for which, when most organizations, the future is arriving faster than forecast, and much faster than they can harness this intelligence as a service that they're getting used to interacting with. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the US and I heard from the Vice President of AI for NVIDIA, who talked about the systems problem of AI. That we're struggling to embed AI into the organizational processes and systems. And these views chime with academic research and my own interest in agentic AI. Now, given that organizations themselves could be thought of as artificial intelligences, right? They are social, collective, coordinated entities that act intelligently to respond to the world. Maybe it's time to ask if organizations, culture, leadership, R&D, operations are ready for this artificial intelligence. Because I'm interested in whether we are at risk of just using AI to scale the inefficient bureaucratic organizations we already have. I'm thinking of the people who are using Gen AI to produce copious minutes of meetings that really should never have happened in the first place, or send phenomenal new numbers of messages that we didn't need. And I wondered whether we were at risk of creating what our late colleague here at the LSE, anthropologist David Graeber, might have termed bullshit AI jobs. So we've discussed these issues and similar issues when Jana and Phil were kind enough to consult me on writing their book. And they take a wholly different path. Their focus is on preparing organizations for the radical and people for the radical change of any change, but also of AI. They're rooted in deep thinking about people, technology, and organizations. They focus on helping companies find better ways to adapt and learn, and that's the focus of the Octopus Organization. They don't start with technology, they start with leaders, and they implore leaders to start with the organization and challenge what they describe as anti-patterns, some of which, Phil, you're going to introduce shortly. These anti-patterns are the formulaic responses to complexity that, despite their good intentions and despite their surface level appeal, consistently make things worse in the companies that they've studied. So through interviews with executives in successful companies, they have, as practitioners, sought to synthesize and share how to overcome those anti-patterns and to build learning and adaptive organizations ready to address the challenges of AI today. So the book, I've got a copy here, it's a very practical book. It's actually now on my reading list, I told you that, for some of my stories, and they would love you to review it if you're interested. Okay, so without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Phil, who's going to speak for around 40 minutes, and then we're going to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Firstly, let me send my apologies from Jana. Jana is a mum. She's an executive in residence, she's a Harvard author, she's an incredible human being. She's devastated she can't be here today. She's done what every leader should do, which is she's made a high priority call and she's at home with her sick child. So I hope you get to meet her. I will try and do her proud tonight. Who eats at McDonald's? Try again. Okay. Not too bad. Not too bad as an audience. It's an honesty test. I spent 31 years at McDonald's Corporation. I used to be their international CIO, led their data development supply chain innovation team. Jana's got a similar practitioner background. And our job is quite simple in many ways. Our job is to help leaders make their own mistakes, not someone else's. And what I find ironic, and I've done this, we've made these mistakes. What I find ironic is, boy, do we like to make the same mistake time and time again. Because we're different. We're McDonald's. You know, we've got different needs to everyone else in the world. And we've seen a pattern here I wanted to share with you tonight. And we start off thinking, firstly, let me ask you a question. Who in the audience is going through a transformation at the moment? How's it going? So what we studied is what differentiates those organizations that truly become more agile, more resilient from those that try but don't. And has AI affected that at all? So if we look at how most organizations are structured today, and you may be familiar with this from your current organization or organizations you've worked for in the past, most of our organizations are influenced by 19th century thinking. They were designed around compliance, eliminating variability, measuring the worker doing the same thing predictably every single time, manufacturing 1,000 nails or 50 cars in exactly the same way. And management's job was to make sure that they could do that, and efficiency became about doing more of the same thing faster. And it all was about individual measurement, so measuring the individual and their ability to hit certain metrics. So we talked to about 70 executives around the world, folks like Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, Benedetto Vigna, the CEO of Ferrari. We looked at the thousands of customers we've dealt with. We've looked at how Amazon works and also some of our own learnings. And what we identified was, as Will touched on, 300 dysfunctions of change. 300 things which many organizations which struggle to change do. And we took those and boiled them up into just over 36 what we call anti-patterns, these formulaic responses we see in organizations. Now, the good news is, because there's drinks after this, I'm not going to take you through all 300, unless anyone wants me to. No? But I do want to illustrate a few as we go through this. Has anyone heard the story of the squirrels in Amsterdam? End of the 1990s, 400 squirrels were being flown from Hong Kong to Greece via Schiphol Airport. Don't ask me why. I have no idea why. And they reached Schiphol Airport, and they didn't have the right paperwork. Squirrels needed passports. And one of the employees of this particular airline picked up a manual. Nothing's in there about rogue squirrels. But there was something about livestock. So said employee took 400 live squirrels and dropped them into a chicken shredder. Now, that isn't the real story. The real story is the CEO said in public, well, it wasn't probably the best thing to do, but we were just following the process. And we see this in a lot of organizations. Organizations which are so fixated on following a process, they actually forget what the process is designed to do in the first place. Or, have any of you worked in an organization which wanted to be a platform-based, AI-enabled, data-driven organization that drives global synergies with its customer base through novel and holistic delivery? That's not far off one company's actual mission statement. It's Dilbertis. I mean, what they hope from that is Wall Street's going to look at it and say they're transforming. They're going to become digital and platform-based. Oh, it should drop AI in there too. A number of companies I meet today who are going to be AI companies. And they sell hamburgers or cars. They're not AI companies. AI is an enabler. So you may recognize this too from your past experience. Many transformations go something like this. We take a rigid, linear, top-down approach to transformation. We benchmark the organization. We say, well, your organization is spending 5% on people. We're going to spend 4%. It's a race to the bottom. There's analysis and benchmarking. Best practice. And the problem with best practice is as soon as you have the best practice, why would you ever change? Because you have the best practice. And all of this is fed into a machine, and out pops a transformation program. And normally that transformation program starts with an org chart. which is probably the least effective way of changing any organisation. Because we know an org chart is a theoretical representation about how work really gets done in an organisation. So we go from this as-is state to a to-be state. We go through a 5-year transformation, which is soul-destroying. We get to the end, 70 to 90% of them fail, but let's say we get to the end, we're so exhausted, we stop. And when we stop, we start to slide backwards until the next transformation. This isn't news. We've known this for about 60 years, if not longer, that these sort of transformations just don't really sit well with organisations. In fact, for anyone who's lived through one of these, it feels like someone's wired your organisation with dynamite and pushed a plunger. It's devastating, it's soul-destroying. People aren't excited about what the company's doing. They're worried about if they have a job. A couple of folks we interviewed wrote the book Reorg. They say, what happens at the top of an organisation is about 30% of the management team spent all of this time on analysis and looking at a reorg and then announce a reorg. 70% of the organisation only has one question for you. Do I still have a job? And if you can't answer that, they're not really interested in the fact you want to drive a 7% increase in return on incremental capital invested, whatever that means. So at the heart of this, and this isn't new science, but at the heart of this is the problem that we treat organisations as if they're linear constructs. They're complicated. They're a bit like a bike. You can take a wheel off a bike and put a new one on, it still works. We try and do the same with organisations. We decompose them into small parts, change the part and then try and plug them all together. And it doesn't really work very well. In fact, it reminded us of the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz. That rusting, soulless, heartless character. You could rip an arm off, plug another one on. A mechanical construct where change is seen as positive. I'm improving, Tin Man. Well, in most organisations, transformation is not seen as a positive because it just creates this fear within the individuals. Is anyone into systems thinking? Good. Excellent. Well, the reality is organisations are what systems thinkers call complex. If you change one part of an organisation, there's an unintended consequence or a consequence somewhere else. You address that, there's a consequence over here. You can't plan for this. There's a first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth order implication of a change. And the idea of putting a project plan together to manage the change to what is effectively an organism simply doesn't work. In fact, we used to say that to set up product teams, well in Amazon we call 2 pizza teams, took about 160 changes. Everything from recruitment through to how you compensate individuals, do you measure the team or the individual, how leaders lead, how teams will set objectives, over 160 changes. Now, what we found in the world of agentic is to scale agentic workflows in organizations. You're now talking about over 250 changes. Not big changes, but many, many small changes to actually make your organization effective with agentic. You have to sanitize decades of legacy data, retrain leadership teams to trust probabilistic rather than deterministic outcomes. So it's everything from education of the C-suite all the way down to how work actually gets performed at the front line of the organization. Even what sounds like simple things like reimagining business processes. As Will talked about, we found this in a study we did in April in the UK. And we talked about the 2-tier economy. And the 2-tier economy is quite simply, most large-scale enterprises are taking modern technology and trying to become 10% more efficient. Most startups are taking the same technology and are trying to become more effective, delivering better services, better products, faster into the hands of consumers. So how as an enterprise do we become more adaptable and more imaginative about what we can do in our organization? So we ended up describing this as the octopus mindset. And some of you have probably seen the octopus on TV. There's some well-known shows out there now about this incredible adaptive animal with 9 brains, 1 neuroclusters in each of its arms and a central brain. This ability to adapt to its local environment, its ability to reprogram itself, going from, say, cold water to hot water, and this incredible ability to learn. What I find fascinating about the octopus is, instead of a hard shell like the Tin Man as a defensive mechanism, it uses its ability to be agile and to learn, to become adaptive and resilient in hostile environments. Now, when we looked at those organizations that were adaptable and resilient, we found a few things held true. These leaders did change with people, not to people. There was a great HBR article years ago that said the average manager understands about 40% of the work his or her employees do every day. So this idea that you can redesign workflows and you don't even really know how the workflow works at the front line of your organization, there's something a bit off there. So how do you actually engage people? Or as one chief transformation officer told us, how do you light 1,000 fires? Can you imagine if 1,000 people in your organization are driving change, as opposed to this being a top-down imposed change? How sustainable that is, how engaging it is to individuals in your organization. The second thing is change is continuous. This idea that as soon as you stop changing, you go backwards. Who has a 5-year roadmap in their business for technology? Who saw COVID coming? It's hard to predict the future. A 5-year roadmap 5 years ago wouldn't have predicted agentic or generative AI. It wouldn't have predicted a lot of the aftershock of COVID with geopolitical instability. The best way of being adaptable and resilient is this ability to learn quickly and pivot, which brings me on to my third point. Those organizations that do a great job being adaptable and resilient are the ones that continually experiment. Some of those experiments won't work, but each of those experiments yields a learning about what they can do next time. And they do this at scale, giving permission to every individual in the organization to try something different. Because the best people to reinvent their jobs are those people who are actually doing the jobs in most cases. In fact, in Amazon, we have a term for this. So we talk about a day one organization. It's one of the reasons Amazon has been using AI for about 28 years now. And we see it in everything from our logistics centers to robotics to Kindles to Alexa and the such like. It's this ability to continually adapt. And part of what is at the heart of that is this desire never to be complacent. I would hope what you'd find if you talk to any Amazonian and you said to them, everything you do is brilliant. I'd hope the response you get is, thank you, but I know there's something we can do better. Too often companies lapse into this status quo where everything's going great, so let's stop changing. And that's where they start to go backwards. Now, as we took those 300 dysfunctions, those 36 anti-patterns, we found that 3 conditions need to be true to become adaptive and resilient. These needed to be true before AI. They're even more essential now. The first is everyone needs to be clear in the organization about what the good looks like. And I'll come on to some examples of these to illustrate them in a moment. They need to understand what the real problems and opportunities are to address.
Yeah.
They want to feel ownership, they being the people in the organization. They want to feel like they're part of something big, that their job matters, that they have the agency to make a difference. And thirdly, they want to be curious. And this is more important now than ever, this idea that it's impossible to have all of the answers, but those people who are willing to ask questions and experiment are going to find some unbelievable opportunities in their organization. And what we find is there's actually a virtuous circle here. As people become clearer about what their organization stands for, they're more willing to take ownership because they know what they're taking ownership of. As they take more ownership, as they truly feel like they make a difference in their organization, they become curious. They want to improve what they do. They ask questions, they experiment. And through experimentation, it becomes clearer about what that company or organization's opportunities and problems are. Now, what I want to do fairly briefly is for each of these, just take you through a couple of examples or so. So we'll start with clarity. And what we see with Tin Man organizations is they breed this bureaucratic fog of processes, of governance meetings, of steering meetings, of PMOs and vendor management offices and the such like. But what clarity brings is a shared understanding of the context everyone's operating in, an understanding of what business that organization is actually in. It's the oxygen that actually fuels progress in organizations. Clarity is the foundation on which everything else is built. There was a study done a few years ago that said 50% of transformations fail as step number one. Step number one is the senior leadership team talk about, we want to be an agentic AI organization. Everyone leaves the room saying, sounds like an IT problem. But no one is actually saying in the room, hey boss, I don't understand what you mean. You know, who's accountable? What's the outcome? What are we going to stop? What does good look like? What's in this for the customer? Simple steps that skipped, and we end up with no clarity in these sort of Dilbert-esque statements. In fact, when we talked to our Generative AI Innovation Center recently, and there was a report some of you may have seen from MIT that said 95% of AI experiments fail. Now, it's been somewhat discredited, but there's a great of truth there. And what we actually found is within our Generative AI Center, 73% of proof of concepts succeed. And they succeed simply because people understand what problem is being solved. So let me give you a couple of real examples. And I sort of feel like I need to apologize at this point because nothing I say is rocket science. But I'd ask you the question, if it's not rocket science, why do we make the same mistake time and time and time again in organizations? The first is quite simply around purpose and strategy in an organization. Tin Man organizations have a strategy, but it's normally in some sort of management gobbledygook. It's not communicated. And in fact, one study showed that while something like 67% of leaders believed that everyone knew what their strategy was, the real number was 2%. Can you imagine that? All of your employees, bright, intelligent, keen people coming into your office every day, and each one of them has a different idea about what great looks like, just because someone hasn't done a good job at communicating. And in an AI era, this becomes even more essential. It becomes an opportunity where efficiency gets lost. AI is a powerful engine, but it doesn't come with a steering wheel. Someone, us humans, leadership, needs to define where it fits into an organization. I'll just read a Shane Parrish quote, which sort of sums it up to me. The greatest business failures often come from not playing the game poorly, but from continuing to excel at things that no longer matter. So this comes down to, are leaders really clear about what success looks like for their organization? And a few things, I'll just share a couple of things we see in those organizations that do this well. They speak in plain language. They communicate widely about what the opportunity is. They don't use words like platform-based, agentic-enabled organization. Amazon's purpose is quite simple, to be Earth's most customer-centric company. Very simple. I'd be surprised if you actually found an Amazonian who didn't know that, because it's simple to remember, but it also, more importantly, applies to all of our jobs. I'm not a management consultant. I'm not here to sell you anything, apart from a vision of a better future. But my job exists simply because to be Earth's most customer-centric company, my job is to help you make your own mistakes, not someone else's. Indra Nooyi, when we spoke to her, the former CEO of PepsiCo, talked about her performance with purpose. It was a mantra that lasted for 12 years in PepsiCo, and it drove everything from who was hired, to compensation, to how work actually got done. We also find, though, honesty comes into play here. You're not going to have all of the answers, and people actually want to see that human side of leaders where we say, hey, I don't know yet. I don't know what agentic means to my organization. I'm excited about the possibilities, but we're going to figure that out together. And one of the takeaways I'll leave from Amazon is, if I look at most Tin Man organizations, and some of you may have seen this, if you look at their strategy, if you left that strategy without a company name in a McDonald's and someone picked it up, would they know which company had written it? And the answer is often no, because you're going to be the most sustainable, the most customer-centric, the most employee-friendly organization on the planet. It doesn't mean anything. If you look at Amazon.com, the e-commerce business, I can't predict the future, but I think it's fair to say in 10 years' time, Amazon customers won't want higher prices, they won't want less selection, and they won't want slower deliveries. So they become the durable needs you can actually anchor a business on for a long time. So I'd ask you the question, in your own business, what are your durable needs? Who has one overwhelming priority in their organization? I'm shocked. Did you know before the 1900s the word priority didn't have a plural? How can it? How can you have 400 priorities, which one CPG company we worked with had 400 priorities? Let me ask you another question. Who's good at multitasking? A trick question, don't put your hand up. Your neural architecture doesn't allow you to multitask. So we give a poor individual 40 priorities to work on. Every time they context switch, they lose up to 30 minutes. And it feels like, hey, we're making great progress. We've got 40 priorities on the go. It doesn't work like that. In 2017, McDonald's was set 3 priorities by the CEO. 20,000 restaurants in e-commerce, 8,000 restaurants in home delivery, and thousands of restaurants with a reimagined customer experience. 3. Within a year, we delivered those and put the foundation in place that grew the company at a massive rate. But it's a really, really hard leadership trait to say, here's what I'm not going to do. Progressive organizations focus as much on what they're going to stop as they do on what they're going to start. We talked to a CEO, Benedict Le-Brun. He ran a sports apparel company in Germany. He was actually driving to Taliban country when we spoke to him, because he was also an extreme mountaineer. And Benedict told us a story of his mountaineering. He says, hey, are there any extreme mountaineers in the audience by any chance? Good, so I'll get away with any sort of anomalies in my story. He said, here's what most extreme mountaineers do. They carry up to 60 kilos of equipment. They trudge through the death zone at 8,000 meters where oxygen cannot sustain life. It takes them 5 days to summit. They then turn around and walk back down. That's the plan. If the weather changes, if someone breaks a leg, everything goes to pot. Benedict takes a different approach. He cuts his shoelaces off, zippers off his equipment, off his jacket. He even shaves his hair and his eyebrows, and his whole team does that. They carry no more than 7.4 kilos of equipment. They move through the death zone in just 2 days, and then they ski down. He said, how's that relevant to business? And he applied it to his job as CEO. His job as CEO was to cut the zippers off, cut the shoelaces off, shave the hair. It was to make sure that new priorities didn't continue to creep into the business. It's what we call the tyranny of and. We can do this, and this, and this, and this. Really good leaders decide what they're not going to do. And they quite proudly publish a list of things they're killing. Or an alternative from a CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. She said, look for the hell yes test. You know when you're sitting around a table and someone says, we could do this, and everyone says, yeah, whatever. We could do this, yeah, whatever. We could do this, yes, we need to do that. Look at where the energy is, the hell yes test. What galvanizes the entire leadership team that they get so excited they're going to invest their time and passion into something? And then there's the buy and hope of AI. We've signed a license deal for an AI product. Everyone has to use it. Any questions? The first question is, what problem am I solving exactly? And you know, AI is unbelievable. I mean, the things it can do for society, for organizations is incredible. But in most organizations, it feels like we're strapping a jet engine onto a creaky old rowboat and then wondering why it's not powering across the Atlantic. We drop this magic fairy dust of AI into an organization and expect things to change. In fact, there's an interesting law called Martek's law. It says technology comes along, nothing changes. It's only when we change how we work and the skills in organizations that we see these massive improvements in productivity. So Don't be that, by all means, automate away undifferentiated heavy lifting in your organizations. But before you automate a process, ask a simple question. Should this process even exist in the first place? We do tend to automate a lot of things which shouldn't be there. We optimize tasks that shouldn't even exist. So bring strategic clarity to what AI is designed to do in your organization. What is that unique human value you actually want to liberate by using this technology? Where do you want us humans to play? Where do you want the majority of your resource to reside? Be clear about the fundamental assumptions around your business model, and also be clear about where you're going to plug humans in the loop or on the loop of AI. So you may have agentic draft a contract, but you may still want a human to sign off on it. Second topic I'll give you a couple of examples on is ownership. Tin Man organizations see employees or workers, as they were called, shackled in chains of governance and process and bureaucracy which no longer makes sense. Those individuals don't feel safe to act. In fact, the knee-jerk reaction of a Tin Man organization if an individual experiments is to say, why did you deviate from the process? Why didn't you ask for permission? We all want to go into work and feel like we make a difference. In fact, has anyone read Daniel Pink's book, Drive? No? Great book. He talks about 3 things humans want. Autonomy, that space to be able to practice our art without being micromanaged. Mastery, the skills we need. Today, it's things like AI, but it's also about creative thinking. And then purpose, this idea that we're doing something bigger than just a job description. And particularly as we introduce agentic agents into the organization, this idea of pushing ownership further down the organization becomes even more essential. So people are making decisions closer to the customer. Has anyone heard the story of the pig and the chicken? No? Pig and chicken walk down the street. Chicken turns to pig and says, let's open a restaurant. Do you see where this is going? Pig turns to chicken and says, great idea, what are we going to sell? Chicken says to pig, ham and eggs, of course. Pig stops and says, I need to be far more committed than you do in this venture. Here's the lesson. Most organizations have lots and lots and lots of chickens. Lots of people who make partial decisions, who are gatekeepers, who can say no, who have an opinion. Most organizations have too few pigs. Please don't take that term into your HR process. We'd call them single-threaded leaders. Apple would call them directly responsible individuals, DRIs. Who are those individuals in your organization that have been tasked with delivering value? Not just their part of value in a silo, but an end-to-end piece of value into the hands of a customer. We talk about shortening the distance between the decisions made and the people building solutions. Again, it comes down to how do you push decisions closer to the front line? How do you get people to actually want ownership of delivering business value, not just requirements or software, which is an abstract concept to most customers? It's painfully visible, this problem in meeting culture. I think the stat says 24 billion hours are wasted in the US alone on pointless meetings. Single-threaded leaders cut through that. You know that at least one person is waking up every morning saying, are we making progress, delivering value in this particular area to a customer? So, simple things. Make sure that someone is actually appointed as that decision maker to deliver value. Often you'll find in an Amazon meeting, when an argument's been going on for a while, someone will say, hey, who is that single-threaded leader? Who actually makes the decision? Make decisions smaller. The smaller a decision, the smaller the blast radius. The smaller the blast radius, the more assured you can be to push that decision close to the front line. We take some ridiculous decisions and make them 14 levels above the person who can make the decision in the first place. It takes ownership away from people. And call out chicken behavior. Let people, encourage people to stand up in a meeting and say, hey, I thought I'd be useful here, but I'm not. I'm going to leave. Make that socially acceptable. Has anyone heard of Annie Duke? Any poker players? Are you poker players? Annie Duke is the most successful female poker player on the planet. She's got about 4 million in the bank, I think she told us. She's also has a doctorate in decision science. And fascinating lady, wrote the book Quit. And you know those budget meetings you're in where you say, this year, over the next 12 months, I'm going to spend $12.65 million. Really. We make decisions at the point of least information. And she encourages simple things like think in ranges, not absolutes. I'm 70% certain this decision is right. Why that's important is quite simple. If you just say, here's a decision, our human instinct, our desire to avoid loss aversion means we will defend that decision even if we find it's wrong. If you say you're 70% certain, you're communicating to people that this decision may change. It becomes less about your ego, more about information you may have acquired during the process. Another psychological thing, just find quick criteria up front. So when you decide to do an initiative, decide when you're going to stop it. It's the best time to decide when are you going to kill something. Because as soon as you start building something without quick criteria, loss aversion again kicks in. No one wants to say, I've wasted time or money. They will go at that project until an organization collapses. So make it acceptable for people to quit. And also document decisions. There's this problem called resulting, where if a good outcome results, people assume the decision was good. If a bad outcome results, they assume the decision was bad. Our organizations are so complex, it's not that simple anymore. So teach people how to make good decisions. Let people document their assumptions. Look at those assumptions at an end of an initiative. And then, has anyone not heard of psychological safety? Does anyone not feel psychologically safe tonight? We'll see when it comes to questions. None of this works. None of this ownership works if people don't feel safe to speak up. And this is an animal instinct. It's not, when you walk into a room, you make this instant judgment about whether you feel safe or not. Ownership without psychological safety, it's a trap. It doesn't work. When people feel unsafe, they will not innovate. And this becomes critical as we think about AI. If AI is inherently probabilistic, it's not always going to be right. If it's not always right, then people are going to be afraid of using it if they don't feel like mistakes can be made. So giving people permission to experiment is contingent on feeling safe to fail. They'll see large language models as a liability if they don't feel safe. They'll start to think about, will I lose my job if this is successful, rather than the excitement they should have of what they can do in their organization with this technology. So we see organizations who do this well. Firstly, just acknowledge that psychological safety isn't something you build across a company. You build it in teams. As leaders, you can do simple things like asking questions. If someone says something you don't understand, often our human reaction is say, that's wrong, I don't understand. Ask a simple question. What am I missing? Maybe as a human being, I'm missing something that individual knows. Provide contribution options. Amazon's a very written culture, which is great for those folks who don't necessarily want to stand up and say something in a meeting. So give people an option to write things down, submit things up front from meetings. And then, does anyone have brilliant jerks in their organization? Yeah, there's always a few. It's interesting. There was a study done that said brilliant jerks, those people who probably know your organization really well, they've been around forever, they're also the people who roll their eyes when someone says something. They're the ones who say, this is never, we tried AI last year. It's not going to work. It's never going to work here. They're very opinionated. They destroy twice the value that hiring an A player does. I'm not suggesting you go back and fire them, but coach them. Because ultimately, we deliver value now in organizations through teams. Those teams are increasingly becoming agentic enabled, but they're still human teams. And if you want to build psychological safety, you have to have this freedom to have creative abrasion, to have different points of view, to be able to argue with each other, not at each other, but attacking a problem they're trying to solve. Final section, which is really pertinent today with the rate of change with AI, is around curiosity. This is about learning and experimentation, particularly with the rate of change of technology at the moment. Your tin man organizations gravitate towards certainty, predictability, process. Processes are the attempt to codify how a job gets done. And it's ridiculous. You can't write enough rules to govern every exception. I can't remember who said it, but someone wise said, to protect an organization from 1% who make mistakes, we introduce processes. And introducing processes, we penalize and handcuff 99% of the rest of the organization. We're working with an energy company, for example, and for decades, they've had to be really, really focused on operations, supplying fuel and electricity reliably. But they're now facing an unprecedented spike in energy consumption with things like electric vehicles and the consumption with AI. And the CEO is struggling to get her people to think creatively because their operational processes simply aren't going to take them into the future. She's trying to teach them how to get their curiosity back. Let me ask you a quick question, because there's a point to that. Where do square trees grow? Don't forget, psychologically safe environment, no such thing as a stupid answer. Anyone with kids? Minecraft's one. Any other guesses? Lego, I haven't heard that one before. It's actually, if you imagine, that's a good one too. They actually grow in Panama. Look it up, it's true. Square trees grow in Panama. But notice what happens when I ask a question to the moment you get an answer. There's this curiosity, there's this tension, there's a desire to seek an answer, not for any explicit reward, but this intrinsic motivation you have to want to know an answer. Now, for those with young kids, you may recognize this. If you have kids around 5 to 6 years of age, they'll ask up to 120 questions an hour. Does that sound familiar? Why's the sky blue? Why's the sky blue? Why? Why's the sun up? By the time they're teenagers, if they're still talking to you, they're asking about 7 questions an hour. We train our children to stop becoming curious. They enter the workplace. We train them to have answers, not questions. And going back to Indra Nooyi, I asked her, what 2 attributes does she look for in good leaders? And she said 2 things: the ability to storytell, to communicate, to bring people along. The other one is curiosity, because as soon as you lose your curiosity, you cannot lead, because you don't know how to ask questions. If you stop asking questions, your organization stops changing. A couple of examples. We spoke to Astro Teller, who's the CEO of the Alphabet Moonshot X Labs, known for things like self-driving cars and the such like. And he talks about this, where failure feels painful and shameful to many of us in organizations. So the way he deals with this, because at the end of the day, if you're curious and you're going to experiment, not everything's going to go right. You can't predict the future. You can't predict the outcome of an experiment, otherwise it's not an experiment. So he encourages organizations to do a couple of things. So next time you start your agentic AI initiative, think about the following. It's 6 months in the future. You've launched your initiative. It's been so disastrous. It's gone so disastrously wrong that as you walk down the corridor, you can't look your co-workers in the eyes. What happened? And what's interesting is it spiked people's curiosity. It's a safe environment. This hasn't really happened. But people will come up with a lot of reasons that could derail an initiative. And then you can go and resolve them. The other thing is start with a hypothesis. Many of us have experienced this where a leader said, we are going to become a digital organization. Now, you can't say, well, I don't know what you mean. This is a person declaring their belief. It becomes really hard to argue that belief because it's at the core of what that person believes. Simple thing you can do, start with a hypothesis, just like you used to do in chemistry lessons. I believe the introduction of agentic AI could take 50 hours out of my accounts payable workflow. It's a hypothesis. You test your hypothesis. If it's wrong, you've learned something, you move on. If it's right, you can scale it. It takes that personal element out of experimentation. The only failure with experimentation is if you don't learn something. Final question for the audience. How do you get a monkey to sit on a 10-foot pedestal and recite Shakespeare, what would you do first?
Teach them.
Teach a monkey? Others?
Do it. Oh,
Here's the answer we get from most organizations. They build the pedestal. Is the monkey ever going to talk? Probably not. Why do leaders build the pedestal? They want to show progress. They want to secure their funding, show the team is actually making progress. If you can't tackle the hardest issue first and make progress, then it's not worth building the pedestal. So as you start to think about your organizations and the introduction of AI, think really big. Don't be the company or organization that wants to improve things by 10%. Think about what you could do if there were no constraints, but then find the hardest issue and try and solve it. If you can't solve it, you've got to know quickly, you haven't wasted a lot of resource. Those people, those leaders who then say, hey, I'm never going to get the monkey to talk, give them a hug. Publicly acknowledge them, because those leaders have saved you a lot of pain in your organization, a lot of wasted resources. Now, in an era when software can be built in minutes now, the boundaries of your industries are evaporating. If you're a car company, are you still making vehicles? Are you giving people an experience? If you're a logistics, if you're a mining company, are you still digging holes in the ground? Or are you morphing into something fundamentally different? Those boundaries of our traditional organizations are changing significantly. So we need to lead our organizations in different ways to acknowledge this. It's become even more essential with AI as the rate of change has increased significantly. And it's not just the rate of change, it's changing the fundamental way we do work and the skills required in the workplace. In fact, we know that one of the biggest barriers to the use of artificial intelligence is purely skill sets from the C-suite on downwards. So if you as leaders can do simple things, bring clarity to the problems you're solving, give people ownership for solving those problems, and then allow them to experiment, use their curiosity, give them the tools, let them in sandboxes with AI so they can experiment safely, you're going to see some incredible things in your organization, as opposed to those organizations that layer on governance after governance after governance, in this false assumption that they're going to mitigate every risk. And in the process, they introduce the biggest risk they can to their organization, which is the inability to be adaptable and resilient. So you don't all have to be AI experts. Your people are experts in your organization. They have a passion for your organization. Your job as leaders is to help free them from constraints so they can focus on what really matters in your organization. And start simple. Get a team together. Have them flick through the book or throw out a bunch of issues you see. See where their eyes roll, their shoulders grow heavy, they groan. They know where the issues are in your organization. Give them the freedom to come up with a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, share the learnings, and do that time and time again across your organization. Give them the technology. Let them have the technology which they can use to improve their jobs. But don't tell them technology is the answer. Make sure they're really clear about what problem you're trying to solve. All of this sounds simple. All of this is done by very few companies. You've got the ability here to fundamentally change the destination of your organization. And in the process, have a workforce that is extremely motivated and committed because they feel like they can make a difference in your organization. So with that, thank you for listening to me, and I believe you have some questions.
Thank you very much, Phil. I should say, by the way, that the book is available behind this pillar after the talk. So I was going to start with just a couple of questions, and one of them that hit me was there was a consulting firm that put forward the idea of ambidexterity or bimodal type organizations, which was essentially we can have part octopus and part tin man. And I just wondered what your view was of the idea of having a kind of fast, slow, ambidextrous organization.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that conversation in a real organisation.
You're going to be fast, you're going to be slow, you're going to be fast, you're going to be slow. I think, why would you optimize any part of your organization to be slow? Now, we would encourage organizations to think about what makes them unique. So those things, we all need payroll systems, we all need HR systems and the such like. You don't want to be spending a lot of your internal resource, your committed employees, on managing those systems. So, do optimize those for cost and reliability and the such like. But in order to free up people, so all of your employees can actually focus on being faster, more adaptable, and contributing to whatever your company's purpose is.
Perfect. We've got many of my management information systems and digital innovation MSc students in the audience. I can see lots of recognizable faces. I just wondered what lessons you would share with the most junior staff. You were very much focused on the leaders at the top, but they're joining organizations. How can they approach their careers in an Octopus-like way, and how can they take advantage of these lessons as they're starting off?
Buy the book. No, actually, we have this saying in Amazon that everyone's a leader, and it's actually true. If you think about most organizations, each employee actually leads something. It may just be themselves, but if you go into an organization with this mindset that I am a leader, I have agency, there's things I can do. You don't be satisfied with the status quo. If I look at the original transformation of McDonald's, when I joined McDonald's, we had 80 countries. We had probably 130 different technology stacks. And it was a fairly junior team that started the company on a journey to standardize the technology, because those people believed it was the right thing to do because they were close enough to the fact that all of that fragmented technology meant the organization was very, very slow. So go into this with a mindset that you have agency, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Look at what you're trying to optimize your job for, your team for, and experiment. I mean, most experiments are safe. They can be constrained. They can be done with a very small blast radius. They could take a day. But through those experiments, if every one of you introduces a different way of thinking about a problem, maybe just have a conversation, ask a question in a meeting, which may get people to think differently. Speak up. You don't be that teenager who doesn't want to speak to their parents anymore, or who believes that having the answer is the only way to be successful. The best leaders, people like Benedetto Vigna at Ferrari, phenomenal example to me. When he joined, he signed over 300 NDAs, so he could talk to suppliers and others about what were they seeing that Ferrari could do better. He went to the shop floor and talked to the engineers creating cars about what they could do better. He went on to CNBC and talked about his failures to communicate to his folks that, hey, if you're moving fast, you're going to make mistakes. Even I make mistakes. So I think there's many, many little things you can do. Don't feel a victim. Take ownership of your job and make it better.
Fantastic. We're going to open up to the floor for questions now. So we'll take groups of 2 or 3 questions. Please raise your hand and wait to be called. There are people with microphones over here who are going to bring them to talk. So could you wait for the microphone? If you could say your name and affiliation, that would be great. And please keep your questions short, and questions end with a question mark. Okay, so any questions? There's a person here in the black. Yes.
Hi, my name is Edja. I'm a student of Will's. I'm doing my master's at LSC. My question is, what's the most common invisible bottleneck you see in organizations that claim they want speed? Something leaders don't realize they're doing, they're slowing everything down.
Great question. I would pick, there's an anti-pattern machine called Shadow of the Leader. I'll give you a simple example. Nearly 80% of issues associated with the effective use of data are nothing to do with technology. They're people, organization, culture, leadership, and skills. And one of those anti-patterns is quite simply a leader standing up and saying, we're going to be a data-enabled organization. But I've been here 20 years, so I know what the answer is already. So there's that saying, doing gap, for instance. I think leaders, and again, I apply this to everyone in the audience, whatever you're doing, you can all be leaders. Being cognizant of what you're saying, what you're doing, that shadow you cast, You can say, hey, I want all of you to innovate. There's no such thing as a stupid idea. And this is something I used to do. Someone would come up with what I thought was a stupid idea. I'd have my poker face and I'd roll my eyes. I didn't even realize I was doing it until someone pointed it out. So I think it's been very, very self-aware of how you're perceived and the actions, particularly the more senior you get, the actions, all your actions have consequences. Your actions really tell people what's acceptable, not your words.
There's a question here.
Max Cooter, I'm a journalist, I'm afraid. You spoke about organisations giving your employees the ability the freedom to speak, to experiment, to be curious. There's no such thing as a stupid idea. But there's a cultural shift here. People are hesitant. They're reluctant to make these. If you go to any meetings, I know about people who say that their worst experience is on these days out when they have a team meeting and say, well, let everyone introduce themselves for 20 minutes and talk about themselves. That's the worst thing they know about. So there's a huge cultural shift here that you're trying to get people to break out of those barriers that they've imposed upon themselves or society's imposed themselves. That's particularly true in Britain. How do you get over that?
By being relentless in changing your organisation. So transformation becomes a lifestyle choice, it's not a project. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, even if, let's say you became the most magnificent octopus organisation in the world, all it takes is one leader to change and you take a step backwards. So this idea of continuous change, it can happen at a team level. If you're running a team, figure out how you get people to speak up. Some people are introverts, give them contribution options. Some people are only going to speak up if they see others do that, if the leader isn't there criticizing them, rolling their eyes, whatever it may be. There was an interesting study done that looked at CEOs and their behavior with their direct reports. And it said something like 66% of CEOs gave their direct reports autonomy, which means the other third actually micromanaged their organization. But of the 66% of direct reports, only 50% of them felt they had autonomy for two reasons. One is, if they made a mistake, then the boss would say, why didn't you come and see me? They just stripped them of autonomy. The other one was fear. I don't know how to take this autonomy. There's something quite comfortable in organizations if you do what your boss tells you, because it's not your fault. So all of this is lots of little experiments. So when you first say to someone, hey, you've got ownership of this, you define what it is, define the guardrails. The first time that person makes a mistake, if you berate them, you've just taken away all agency. And it's really easy as leaders, because when you give someone agency, you actually really want them to do that job the way you would do it. And you have to give them the freedom to figure it out themselves. So become a good coach as a leader. But it's really hard. That's why transformations don't work. You can't just declare psychological safety has now been imposed on an organisation. We can. I came across one company that did that. You guess how that went. You will all be psychologically safe. Any questions?
There's a question over here.
Hi, I am an investment banker, but I also teach courses. The question of transformation is great. It also requires perhaps the level of safety, which I think people like Dario Emondi and others have been addressing. And if you're talking about Fortune 500 across multi-countries, probably they need a different level of safety along with the cultural aspect. Mm-hmm. So they need to build those bonds, perhaps. I just wondered what your view on that was.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think was it Hofstede who wrote about different cultures and how they work in the workplace and how they collaborate. Someone in China, and nationally from a culture point of view, someone in China, someone in India, someone in Brazil, someone from the UK, they're going to have different national norms. But it's another reason why we believe in decentralized organizations. By all means, at the senior level of the organization, define what your leadership principles are, the sort of people you want to hire, the mission of the organization, but then push decisions down to as close to the front line as possible. Because how a team will operate in India and how a team will operate in Brazil may be very, very different. If you try and standardize and centralize that, It just simply doesn't work. So those leaders need to be aware of the cultural nuances. The other thing I've seen, and I was privileged enough to be an expat for a while when I was at McDonald's. So I got to work in the US, and it's the old thing about two nations separated by a common language. The operating norms in the US are very, very different to the UK. So even I've seen organizations make it a condition of career advancement that you actually do secondments to other cultures, so you learn that your company is very, very diverse. And that's a good thing. You can't standardize these things away.
Other questions? There's one here.
Hi there, my name is Susan Shalmerdine. I'm a doctor, I work in the NHS. So a question for you is, do you think, I loved your talk, I love what you had to say, but do you think there are any organizations that are beyond being an octopus organization? I say that because...
Super octopus?
No, less than, mini octopus maybe. I say that because as a doctor, I am trained to follow protocol. I am penalized for being creative in my problem solving. If I don't follow best practice, I am almost considered negligent. And so I wonder, in your research and talking to other organizations, did you talk to any healthcare organizations, and do you think this applies to them, or are there nuances? Thanks.
It's a great question. Firstly, autonomy without any sort of guardrails is chaos. It's anarchy. So there's always going to, you don't want the CFO in a large Fortune 500 company to wake up one day and think, I'm going to make up new accounting processes because I can. So there's always going to be, and particularly in your field, there's always going to be a set of things you have to do because they genuinely secure, patient safety, whatever it may be. But most medical breakthroughs have come through someone experimenting, someone having that curiosity and saying, maybe there's a different way of doing this. I don't think any organization's beyond saving, whatever saving means. And by the way, there's no such thing as an octopus organization, even though it's the title of that book. There's no organization that is fully octopus. One's always missing a leg, or tentacle gets nibbled off or something. So octopus organization is about this continual evolution. A lot of people still leave their jobs. I think the vast majority of people still leave their jobs because of their boss. So I don't think there's such a thing as an organization beyond saving. Often you find a team where maybe the boss is a brilliant jerk. So I think the NHS, you've got some massive opportunities, not just with technology, but many which are now enabled by technology. There are constraints, there are guardrails you are clearly going to have to follow. But it's worth asking the question, where is the freedom we have as professionals, as knowledge workers particularly? The rules we abide by in most organizations were designed when people were thought to be interchangeable parts, like a bicycle wheel. Just take out one surgeon, plug another one in. How hard can it be? That's not what most of our organizations are like anymore. So I'd love to explore that question more, though, because I do not believe any organization is beyond saving.
There's a question here. Uh-oh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for an absolutely fabulous talk. I'm Sarah Ashwin. I'm actually head of the management department, so we're so pleased to have you here. I come from the employment relations group in my department, so my question is going to reflect that. You said, I think absolutely correctly, that when someone at the top of an organisation announces some kind of transformation programme, what most people are thinking is, oh, hell, what about my job? And you're also talking about employing agentic AI. And I think one of the things that many people are thinking when they now hear about AI being employed in organizations is, oh, hell, what about my job? So really easy question. How do you see that playing out? Thank you.
My belief that anyone who thinks they can predict the future, there's only one consequence of looking into crystal balls, and that's normally cut hands on broken glass. Here's the thing, I don't know. And I think that's unusual to hear in businesses, that I don't know where this is going. But I think the antidote is this ability to experiment, to react, to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and to embed that deep into your organization. One of the most popular jobs in London, I think about 150 years ago, was the lamplighter. Literally the people who went around and lit the lamps. How many of those do you see on the streets of London now? But what we have seen through each of these transitions is jobs are created which no one could imagine. In fact, one stat says that 60%, if you've got preschool age children, 60% of them, when they enter the workforce, will do a job that doesn't exist today. Which to me is even more important. We teach children curiosity. So I'm not going to try and predict the future. I am optimistic. Every wave of technology, from the Industrial Revolution through to the internet and PC and now AI, has created a raft of new opportunities for people. I'm an optimist, even though I'm a Brit, I'm an optimist, that we're going to see something similar. We can't even imagine about the jobs. We've seen this in Amazon's own fulfillment center. We've introduced 1 million robots around the world now. And we have all these jobs that didn't exist. You know, robotic maintenance and programming and folks doing route planning, all of these, which I don't think we could have predicted sitting around the table. Same with electrification many, many years ago. So I think this is why we're so passionate about this topic, is let's be in a place where we can react to the opportunity. Let's turn organizations into places to learn, not just places to perform.
That question there.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm Slava and I'm studying here at LSE, and my question is actually, how do you build psychological safety at Amazon, and how do you encourage workers to not be afraid to take responsibility and innovate? Thank you.
Great question. I think we spoke to Amy Edmondson at Harvard. She's effectively the mother of psychological safety. She's written some great books. She's got a couple of articles out, one very recently about psychological safety in the era of AI. And there's a lot of myths around psychological safety. To me, it starts at the team level. If you look at Amazon, the organization is pretty much constructed around what we call 2 pizza teams. Teams are no larger than to be fed on 2 American-sized pizzas. Don't try it with European pizzas. So you're talking about 8 to 10, 8 to 12 people. Those people are given an outcome to achieve. And it acknowledges that despite our organizational structure of silos, work really gets done despite that structure. So we create those teams. Psychological safety happens in those teams. And it happens by giving them a business problem to tackle and have them attack the business problem. Too often, arguments between people in organizations are personal. I don't like your idea. You don't like my idea. I mean, that's not constructive. Where you're attacking the problem, and I had teams in McDonald's do this, you hear 2 things. You hear people shouting at each other, but passionately, because they want to solve this problem. It's not really directed towards each other, and laughter, because they know they're on the same side. And it takes a different style of leadership to build those teams up. But they're absolutely essential. Professor Linda Hill at Harvard, she's releasing a book called Genius at Scale. She talks about creative abrasion. You actually want those arguments in the team, because that's where your idea and my idea may not be the right idea, but something magic's going to happen when we bring them together. But it's respecting each other in that team. We each bring something different to the table. It's about spending enough time as a team you get to know each other as individuals, because you go through storming, norming, forming, and then performing. It's keeping those teams together. Someone once said the worst vandalism you can do in an organization is to break up teams that perform well together. So having those people work together for a long period of time. And you as a leader aren't there to tell them what to do. You're there to create an environment where they can succeed, where they're clear on what success looks like, and where you're removing constraints from them. But to read some of Amy's articles, they're fantastic.
Any other questions? There's a hand up here. I can't see that.
Thank you. Jorge, alumni and also current student. I came back for a little bit more. So my question is, it seems quite difficult to become an Octopus organization. I mean, your concepts are great. Some of them we're familiar with, but we're still struggling. And even those organizations that are getting closer to, and you've used Amazon a couple of times, we all know that Amazon has had their issues too, particularly fulfillment centers, reactions to unions, and so forth. You know, how do we get better at this finally? Because we've been at it for quite a long time. Thank you.
Continually. I mean, it's a story of the human race. I mean, you get better every day. This idea, the problem with transformations is they don't work because you try and impose a change on an organization as a project. So any organization with humans in is going to be imperfect by nature. I mean, we're not perfect creatures. So does every organization have challenges? Yes. But it's the difference between how an organization that wants to improve reacts versus a traditional organization. A traditional organization would immediately impose process, oversight. It would strip employees of autonomy. It would become less clear about what it's trying to achieve. So everything I've gone through is actually simple at its core, but hard work, because you have to do it every day. As a leader, you have to communicate every day what good looks like. As a leader, when you bring your team together, you have to think, am I creating an environment which is psychologically safe? It's actually easier to go backwards than it is forwards. And it takes a very intentional leadership style to do that. So there is never, here's my belief, there's never going to be an organization where we point to and say, that is an Octopus organization. Because this is all about getting better every single day, as opposed to trying to reach an end state. Those maturity models where someone says, I'm now maturity level 5, I can stop improving. That's not what we're advocating for. This is about continually getting better and acknowledging that a new leader comes in, something goes wrong. There's another problem you have to deal with. It's not easy. It's not easy. But every organization that has been successful in changing how they become, say, more adaptive, this is how they've done it. I haven't come across an organization yet, except one in crisis, an existential threat, that has launched a big transformation program and suddenly they've reached this nirvana end state.
I was interested in the technology side, because one of the anti-patterns that you talk about is the separation of technology and putting the technologists in a technology department where they sit aside the business. I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about how do you bring, given I'm in information systems, how do you bring the technology together?
A couple of factoids. Well, let me ask you a question. How many of you hate people and don't understand money? Okay. That's the reaction we get from most boards when we ask that question. When I ask the same question, how many of you don't understand technology, data, organizational change management? Actually, there's quite a lot of leaders who are quite happy to say, yep, not a clue, that's why we've got a CIO. That's got to change. And in fact, in some countries, we're seeing that change. We're going to see that change because of legislation, where boards will have a strategic an obligation to treat technology as a strategic asset, just like people and money are, rather than just as a cyber risk. So, number one, educate the senior leaders of your organization. Less than 24% of the C-suite outside of technology understand enough technology to do their job. Not to do my job, to do their job. Can you imagine hiring a chief marketing officer who doesn't understand how to use data to target, segment, and personalize? So technology is just like leadership. It's just like managing money. It's a skill that needs to permeate the entire organization. And there's simple things we can do. And this whole book is not based on large-scale changes. It's lots of levers you can pull. The most effective lever you can pull is changing your mental model. And let me give you an example. Well, let me ask you another question. How many of you use the phrase in your organization, the business and IT? No one's going to admit it. Oh, yeah, thank you. Psychologically safe individuals over there. It's devastating. What you've just told the business is you're special. What you've just told your IT employees is you're not part of the business. A colleague of mine, Mark Schwartz, who used to be the CIO for citizenship and immigration under a previous US administration, writes about this extensively. And it's just like, even change your words. We banned the phrase the business and IT. If you're technologists in the organization, you are the business just as much as marketing or finance or operations or R&D are. So it's a simple mental model shift. Start thinking about yourself as an integral part of the business. Act like that. Ask business questions. Every year we were expected in McDonald's to go and work in a restaurant. There's nothing more humbling to see how your technology is really performing and to see what the day-to-day pressures in a restaurant are. So get out to the front line. Indra Nui used to go out with truck drivers, go out to restaurants. Again, it's about curiosity. So be that technologist who actually wants to educate people, not to create this mysterious black box, particularly with AI. Please don't set up has anyone got a Department of AI yet? How's it working?
We're not sure yet. They're not sure yet.
Would you like a prediction?
Yes.
We'll talk about that over drinks. This idea that you create this sort of special group that's going to come up with all great AI ideas. Yeah, the more you can democratize the technology, the better. Put it into the hands of people who can really change their jobs with it. It doesn't mean IT is any less important. They're going to create the safe guardrails. They're going to create the platforms you can run on. They're going to create the ability to get access to the data you need to customize your models. IT becomes even more important. But ultimately, success is about putting technology in the hands of everyone in your organization.
There was another question over here. Yes, on Ray.
Okay, my name is Maria Jose and I'm from the MSD department. So my question is, bearing in mind that algorithm management expands beyond platform workers and algorithms are becoming more organic, how do you think the roles like leaders, facilitators, coaches, or managers in general will evolve in these technology companies working with complex issues?
Great question. How many of you have had some sort of management job? Not a senior manager, but sort of that mid-level manager job. Many of you. How many of you, when you were kids, woke up one morning and said, "I really want to be a manager"? Yeah, we see this phenomena. I don't know if this stat's still accurate, but the management and supervisory ranks have grown at a rate of 2.1 times faster than any other job in the Western economies. And yet most managers hate their job. And most people whose next career step is manager doesn't want to be a manager. We force people to do this because we've created these tin man organizations where we put layers and layers and layers and layers on top of intelligent people to tell them how to do the job we hired them to do in the first place and to come up with process and enforce process. And if you're put in that, position, you're going to generate more and more process. In fact, there's this phenomenon called Parkinson's law. Parkinson was a UK civil servant who noticed that as the UK Navy got smaller, the number of admirals went up. And he actually quantified this and said, your bureaucracy in an organization grows 5 to 7% a year. And this is great, it's like compound interest, except no one wants it. And so what we see is organizations becoming flatter. Because if we believe that most managers don't want to be managers, but they're managers because we force them to do that as the next career step, most of them want to actually be at the coalface of their organization. They want to deliver value. They want to work with the customers. They want to go home at night and say, I did something amazing for a customer today. So I'm not into predictions, but what I see in those organizations that are more agile and more resilient is they don't have as many layers. Doesn't mean they don't have as many people, but there's more folks actually in positions of delivering value. Less about creating process, more about being curious with customers. Does that make sense?
Oh, this I think should be the last question because what I can see is that the bar is opening behind.
Which is the real reason you're here tonight.
Let's have the last question. Thank you.
My name is Divya. I'm part of the IT leadership team of LSE. You talked about prioritization. That's easier said than done. So how do you actually prioritize? And then how do you deal with the disappointment and the enemies you make when you haven't prioritized somebody's pet projects? So what are your tips and tricks around that?
If you think your job is to keep everyone happy, it ain't going to work. Some of this is about accountability. There was a study done years ago that said 50% of technology that's built is never used. So one of the reasons I believe in things like product teams, where you actually bring together IT and operations and basically everyone you need to deliver a valuable outcome, is they're focused on delivering an outcome. Contrast that to how most organizations work today, tin man organizations. Marketing come up with requirements, throw them over the wall to IT. IT develop 98% of them. And of course, marketing is going to say it's the 2% that let us down. No one ever goes back to marketing and said, did you actually get value from the stuff IT built? So it goes back to the pigs and chickens story, which is who's the pig? Who's the single-threaded leader? Who's the person who is there saying requirements, development, deployment, are we getting the value from it? Because what you're going to find very quickly as you groom your backlog of requirements is people are going to fixate on the things which actually deliver value rather than counting the number of requirements. Reason we disappoint people is demand exceeds supply. Because if we have ungated demand where people are just throwing requirements at IT, of course you're never going to keep up. But then also, those leaders and organizations need to identify what their durable needs are and then throw all their resources at that. It gets rid of a lot of the noise. That's not how prioritization happens in most organizations. In most organizations, each function comes up with a list of things they want to do. And it actually puts silos at war. You know, your priority is different to mine. Very quick story to finish this off. There's a problem called a problem called the team of leaders. And here's what happens. A leadership team gets together. The boss says, we're going to become a digitally transformed organization. Any questions? Sounds good to me. Who doesn't want to be digital? Each one of those functional leaders goes back to their silo and says, this is what that means for me. The CFO has a set of requirements. It means we're going to cut costs. IT, we're going to digitize everything. Marketing, we're going to come up with even more offerings. We end up actually taking this one concept, which could, like McDonald's, just lead to 3 goals which unify the company, and instead we turn them into silo by silo by silo requirements. We put our own organization at war with each other, and then we blame IT because they can't develop fast enough.
Perfect. I just want to close. First of all, I want to thank the unsung heroes of Lucy and her team who've put this event together. But I would also like to particularly thank, obviously, Phil and Jana. And Jana can't be here, but I think we should thank her anyway. I think it's been a fantastic event. It's wonderful to bring people from AWS and the book here. If you haven't read it, first of all, there's a Harvard Business Review article available from December. And then again, the book is available at the back. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you so much.